All right, today we're diving into a book that makes a pretty wild claim that we can prevent and maybe even reverse some of our deadliest diseases just by changing what we eat. It's called The China Study, and let me tell you, its conclusions really shake up everything we think we know about nutrition.
And look, it's not just the author making these huge claims. You've got respected doctors like Dean Ornish saying this book could literally save your life. So, what's the deal?
That's the big question, right? We're about to trace the story of a totally mainstream scientist whose research led him down a rabbit hole to a conclusion so radical it set him against pretty much the entire medical and food industry.
So, let's start at the beginning. Our main character in this story is Dr. T. Colin Campbell, and when his career began, he was playing for the other team, so to speak.
You see, Campbell wasn't some radical from the get-go. Far from it. He grew up on a dairy farm. His whole early career was built on the idea that animal protein was the absolute peak of nutrition. In fact, his mission wasn't to question it, it was to figure out how to produce more of it to solve world hunger.
But then, something he saw in a totally unexpected place made him question everything and has sent his career and his life in a completely new direction.
This just made no sense. The conventional wisdom, what he'd been taught his whole life, was that these kids needed more protein to be healthy. But what he was seeing with his own eyes was the complete opposite. The rich kids, the ones eating diets high in animal protein, were getting liver cancer, a disease that usually hits adults. It wasn't just a surprise, it was basically heresy in the scientific community.
Now that crazy observation in the Philippines jogged his memory about this obscure study from India. Researchers there did something really interesting. They took two groups of rats, gave both of them a really potent cancer-causing chemical, and then they changed just one thing. They fed one group a diet high in protein and the other a diet low in protein.
And the results were, well, they were unbelievable. In the high-protein group, 100% of the rats showed signs of liver cancer, every single one. And in the low-protein group, 0. Not a few, not a small percentage, absolutely none. The difference couldn't have been more stark.
So this idea launched decades of research for Campbell and his team. They found that by using casein, which is the main protein in milk, they could literally turn cancer growth on and off just by tweaking the amount of protein the rats ate. It was like a light switch. More animal protein, tumors grew. Less animal protein, they shrank. Just incredible.
Okay, so what they found in the lab was mind-blowing, but it raised the biggest question of all. Does any of this apply to people? To figure that out, Campbell set out on what would become one of the most massive nutrition studies ever done.
And this was no small-time survey. We're talking a huge project between Cornell, Oxford University, and the Chinese government. They picked rural China for a very specific reason. They had all these different populations with similar genetics, but with vastly different diets, many of which were almost entirely plant-based. It was the perfect living laboratory.
And just look at the scale of this thing. They weren't just asking people what they ate. They were collecting blood samples, urine samples, food samples, analyzing hundreds and hundreds of different factors. What they ended up with was just this gigantic sea of data, revealing more than 8,000 statistically solid links between what people ate and the diseases they got.
And when they put the data side by side, the contrast was just wow. The typical American diet was way higher in fat and had way less fiber. But the most dramatic, jaw-dropping difference was animal protein. In the US, it's a huge part of our diet, but in rural China, it was practically 0.
The study basically confirmed what many had suspected. These Western diseases, sometimes called diseases of affluence, things like heart disease, diabetes, certain cancers, they were almost unheard of in places where people were still eating traditional, plant-based diets.
As they sorted through all the data, the link became impossible to ignore. The more animal food people ate, the more chronic disease they had. And some of the numbers were just shocking. For example, the death rate from heart disease for American men was a whopping 17 times higher than for men in rural China. 17 times.
So after all the lab experiments, after this massive human study in China, and after reviewing tons of other research, Campbell's team came to a really powerful, unifying conclusion.
Every piece of evidence, from the rats in the lab to thousands of people in China, all pointed in the same direction. The best diet for human health seems to be one that's built around whole, plant-based foods. And we're talking about food as it comes out of the ground. An apple, not apple juice. Whole wheat bread, not white bread. You get the idea.
And the book really pushes back against this obsession we have with single nutrients, worrying about fat or carbs or getting enough vitamin C.
It argues that's the wrong way to look at it. Real nutrition is like a symphony. It's thousands of things in whole foods all working together perfectly. You just can't bottle that magic up in a supplement. And the data simply suggests that plants give us a better overall package of nutrients than animal foods do.
Okay, this all sounds pretty convincing, right? Which leads to the big question. If the evidence is this strong, why isn't this what every single doctor and health organization is telling us?
Well, Dr. Campbell spends a lot of time in the book trying to answer that. Based on his own tough experiences, he argues that the system is basically set up to protect profits, not public health.
The way the book lays it out, there's this massive conflict of interest. Food industries influence government dietary guidelines. Medical schools barely teach nutrition, so doctors are trained to prescribe profitable drugs instead of dietary changes. And a lot of scientific research is funded to find the next patentable pill, not to prove the simple, unprofitable advice to just eat more vegetables. And that's really the core conflict the book leaves you with. On one hand, it presents this mountain of scientific evidence for a simple, powerful solution to our biggest health problems. But on the other hand, it argues that the system itself is the roadblock. So the final question isn't just about the science, it's about what you do when your own health is caught right in the middle of that fight.